it should be extremely obvious by now, but I'm just going to say it anyway. My favorite video game studio isn't Nintendo, Konami, Capcom, Sonic Team, or whatever. It's Factor 5. From 1987 to 2009, these guys pushed the boundaries of what gaming can do from every front imaginable. From getting more out of the hardware than most, if not all, other developers working on the console of subject, to game design, artistic moments, and even the implementation of music in addition to the music itself. They are highly respected by hardcore gamers as one of the most impressive gaming studios you could ever hope to find. Even companies like Nintendo recognize this, not only praising them at E3 2003, but also allowing them to help design the GameCube after their insanely impressive work on their Nintendo 64 games. However, there's also another side to their games that should be brought up. These games tend to be very, very hard. Now, these games were still well designed and weren't so hard that you want to pull your hair out and break the controller. Today, we're going to be talking about the moments that actually got pretty close. Now, I want to stress on something. When I'm talking about something being frustrating, it doesn't mean that I think that it's inherently bad. Frustration can be a very useful emotion, and games can use it very well. For the most part, Factor 5 were masters at this, but every studio has times where they can go a little too far with something in their body of work. Not all of the entries on this list fall into that category. In fact, there are quite a few moments I praise. That, and I've seen Nintendo fans make these sorts of lists about those games, so I felt that it'd be only appropriate to do something similar with a studio where I can bring more to the table. So without further ado, here are the moments that in one way or another will leave you screaming like a dying guardian. Let's start off with Factor 5's very first game, the Amiga version of Katakis. However, it feels weird even saying that. I say this because the original Commodore 64 version is an entirely different game. The Commodore 64 game was developed by Rainbow Arts, and if you want to know what my favorite shmup of all time is, you're looking at it. I honestly find the Amiga game to be significantly weaker, though it shares similar characteristics, the most notable being that both games are quote-unquote heavily inspired by R-Type. This of course leads into the rather hilarious story of how the Amiga and Commodore 64 versions of R-Type were created.
Activision sued, and the funny thing is how the lawsuit got resolved was Activision had, of course, the official R-Type license, but they didn't have any coders for the Amiga. So they said, you guys cloned this thing damn well. Why don't you do the official R-Type for the Amiga as retribution? And you only and you only have 3 months for it.
The Amiga version is much more blatant about its R-Type likeness. However, there's one crucial difference. It's 1,000,000 times harder. In fact, I'd say that this is Factor 5's hardest game. Like in most spaceship shooters of the time, you will die if you hit anything, and seeing how everything comes at you so quickly, you're going to lose your lives just as fast. So why isn't this any higher? Well, and this feels really weird saying this about a Factor 5 game, but it's not interesting enough. It doesn't engage me to the point where I want to see it through to the very end. Those 45 seconds of gameplay before game over leave me just as satisfied. You could probably tell that this is my least favorite game to come from the studio. But seeing how it was their first attempt, I don't see it as fair to react too negatively towards it, especially when the studio would improve so drastically as it went on. Now let's balance out a mediocre game with a very solid one, Indiana Jones's Greatest Adventures on the Super Nintendo. This game is kind of like a bizarre mix of the Super Star Wars games and Super Castlevania 4. Super Star Wars in the sense that it takes all the most recognizable scenes from a George Lucas trilogy, in this case the original Indiana Jones films, and plays around with them to make a brutal yet entertaining experience, and Super Castlevania 4 due to the whip mechanics and even similar application of them. If that sounds like a great time, then go play it. You'll probably love it. Just expect the difficulty of both combined to be present. This is another case where I'm just going to include the whole game because this game gets brutal. It starts off easy enough, but after the third level or so, it gets really tough and it stays that way. Granted, I last more than 45 seconds unlike the Amiga version of Katakis, however, because this game is actually fun and works with the material provided very well, I want to keep playing. I want to see what the game delivers next. So it just makes it all the more infuriating when I get so close to my goal, but end up falling short at the last second. Now, if you've played a Factor 5 game, especially at a younger age, this kind of sensation should probably be very familiar to you. This game is frustrating, largely for all of the right reasons, so I really have to praise it on that level. It's just a very hard game, and I consider myself lucky to have beaten it. Once. As I've said before, Mega Turrican is one of my personal favorite Genesis games, and is by far the best Turrican experience available on the console. Sorry Accolade, but your attempts kinda sucked. Insert obligatory Bubsy joke here. My only real problem with the game is that I would have liked to have seen the plasma rope mechanic tie into the platforming and exploration more often. To be more specific, it would have been great if the game was more consistently like the last level in the game. I love this level. The platforming, exploration, secrets, use of the plasma rope, hazards, mini-bosses, and that music. Oh, that music! So what's so frustrating about this level? Well, not the level itself, but more so the last part of it. Here you have to ascend to the top of this room using the plasma rope, avoiding enemies and hazards, which is all easier said than done. First couple of tries, you are definitely going to find yourself falling all the way back down again. However, seeing how this is the last platforming challenge in a game filled with challenging platforming challenges, because that statement isn't redundant at all, I think it's rather justified, and the enemy placement, while still punching, is still very well structured and thought out. So even with this last part here, I still love this level. One thing that I've praised about the original Turrican is the jump controls. Even with up being the jump button, it still feels perfectly natural due to just how much control you have over it, and even how well the jump movement ties into the rest of your movement. With these excellent controls, the level design definitely tests them, however with varying levels of success admittedly. I will stand by my conclusion that the game itself is really well designed, and the game holds up tremendously even today. However, with a couple of occasional hiccups thrown in. The controls are so good that you can jump around platforms, and stages 1, 2, and 1, 3 got really carried away with this. Both stages have their own section where you have to jump around platform after platform after platform while cannons fire at you. It helps to take care of the cannons before committing to a full jump, but the point remains, jumping around these platforms is a major pain in the ass, primarily when you're playing it for the first time. Yeah, I've sort of become a pro at doing this. This is something that was done a lot better in Turrican 2 in my opinion, as you're required to jump around just one platform in the first level, and in subsequent levels you use this to access alternative paths and detours, allowing you to find secrets and extra lives. But it's never really required beyond that point, it's just there to show that it's something you can do and can be beneficial. Now back on topic, I like both of these stages, 1, 3 in particular. It's wide open, allows for some interesting platforming and exploration, that and the music kicks ass, but then again, it's Turrican. However, I'd like this level more if it wasn't for the aforementioned issue. It's true that the Accolade Genesis port of the original Turrican doesn't have this issue, however that version has a ton of its own issues, so it comes across as cutting one's throat to cure the nosebleed. Now let's talk about the formula that Factor 5 is most well known for, the Rogue Squadron games. There are 5 games that follow this format. Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Episode 1 Battle for Naboo, Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader, Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike, and Lair. Yeah, I know that last one isn't Star Wars, but it has the same style of gameplay. These games are actually very hard to categorize beyond just Rogue Squadron. They're flying games that play out like real-time strategy games, putting you in the cockpit of one fighter, or alternatively on the saddle of one dragon, and then mixing in gameplay mechanics of both arcade and simulation flight games. I love all of these games, and I love them a lot. However, with this emphasis on putting the player into intense situations and leaving them to frantically come up with strategies within a limited time span, frustration is definitely a very present emotion. However, with most of these levels, you went in with that expectation. That is except for this stage called Sanctuary from Battle for Naboo. Now, when I hear that word, I think of 2 things. Case A being a safe place, free from danger. Case B being... This level falls under Case C. Just kidding, we lied to you. In this level, you are headed to the ruins with the farmers you rescued in the prior level. However, the Trade Federation catches up to you, starts destroying a nearby city, traps the farmers, sets up AAT tanks all around the perimeter of the water, and sends more on the way, as well as a ton of droid starfighters and bombers after the farmers. If that wasn't enough, then you have to protect what farmers survive as they traverse through this trench, and there are even more fighters, bombers, and tanks that want you and the farmers dead. Now, if you have the Cluster Seeker missile upgrade, this level actually isn't all that hard. However, if you don't, which is more likely the case, it's still possible, but definitely not easy in any way, shape, or form, which provides a rather amusing contrast to what the name of this level suggests.
Stop lying!